they talk about influencers. These are influencers, and they're friends of mine. Jack Posobiec, where's Jack? Jack, who's done a great job.
All right, Jack Posobiec, we're back here live, Human Events Daily, Washington, D.C. We're on with Dan Caldwell, former DOD official from the Trump administration. We're talking about all these questions regarding a security framework for Ukraine. And Dan, I'll just throw it to you. You know, this is the $6 billion question, but do you think that the sides can come together on this? Because, you know, we keep hearing these questions about security guarantees, but then it really comes down to it's like you hear President Trump, he wants to do a deal. You hear these leaders, they seem like they want to do a deal. The Russians have shown their willingness. They flew all the way from Moscow to Anchorage, Alaska to talk about doing a deal. It just seems like what's in the middle are it's the blob, it's the media, it's neocons, it's the industrial complex. All of these various things are standing in the way. But it's an incredible situation where you actually have all of the world leaders fairly aligned on this. And, you know, certainly there's questions about, you know, is it the contact line or the oblast line and those things that can be hammered out. But it really seems as though the impediment to peace is not the leaders or the people involved here. It's as they call it, the men in dark suits.
Yes. You know, I do think one thing that has been interesting to watch is that you have seen certain European leaders, at least rhetorically, and of course, the Zelensky regime, really start to recognize that, look, we got to move away from this idea that we're going to achieve this total victory against the Russians. And I think the real turning point with that was when the United States demonstrated in early March that it was willing to shut it all off. And by all of it, I mean our aid, our intelligence, and other types of support that we were providing to Ukraine. That had demonstrated to the Europeans and the Ukrainians that, look, the United States could walk away. If we view that continuing to involve ourselves in this conflict, continuing to try and drive a peace arrangement that nobody seems to want, we will walk away. And that, I saw that firsthand, is that changed the Ukrainian tune significantly. So that was a very important move that the Trump administration did in early March. And if you remember, everybody was melting down back then. They were calling at the end of NATO and the liberal international order and all this other nonsense. But that was an important demonstration of American willingness to walk away, which creates incentives for other people to do more and to do the right thing. Now, I will say that I said specifically the European rhetoric has changed. I think we need to acknowledge that there's a lot of people in Europe, and Europe isn't a unitary entity, who want this war to continue. Again, it's not everybody in Europe, but there are a lot of people who want it to continue for a variety of reasons. Either they still cling to this delusion that Ukraine can win a total victory, or they think it's in their interest for Russia to continue to lose troops in Ukraine, or they think it's a way to keep the United States overinvested in the continent in terms of providing a security umbrella. And really, that's what I think the main European goal has been the last couple weeks, is to try and use a peace settlement, not necessarily just to end the war, but to keep the United States involved in being the primary security provider for Europe. And that's why they're trying to structure security guarantees in a certain way where they're calling it an American backstop, but what they really want is a leading role for the United States. And so, again, that's why I think the administration needs to be really careful about how these security guarantees are structured and what the actual responsibilities of the United States are, and make sure the Europeans don't buck past to us yet again.
Well, and of course, you've also got to run the situation of the potential for bad actors to get involved here, because certainly there's elements of all sides here, as well as who knows what other third parties could get in and really throw a monkey wrench in the works. Because, you know, people, I remember the media kept saying, where's the ceasefire? Why hasn't Trump gotten a ceasefire up in Anchorage? And of course, how can he agree to a ceasefire when he's not one of the leaders of the armies that are currently fighting? So if he sits down and tells the Russians that we're going to have a ceasefire, and then some Ukrainian brigade goes out and or one of these drone forces launches an attack, then who just broke the ceasefire? Now you just bought the entire conflict at this point. And the big worry here that you hear in DC a lot, that I'm hearing a lot too, is that people don't want to get into a situation where this becomes Trump's Afghanistan, where we saw the fall of Kabul and the absolute overrun of the Afghan National Army, the flight of the prime minister out by the as the Taliban took over the entire country. And unfortunately, the Russians have shown that they are far more willing to keep fighting. They're willing to go all the way up to the Dnieper River and possibly even march on Kiev in the next couple of years here if they don't get a deal, because they're basically saying we are willing to pay the price no matter the cost, because it's in our security interest to do so. And the real question here is, will they be able to be satiated for whatever they're given, whether it be, from the Ukrainian side as well as the security guarantees as well? The enemy gets a vote.
Absolutely. And I think you were alluding to this, but we also need to remember, too, is that the current government in Ukraine, and I have to say, they're not completely unified themselves. You know, I won't exactly say who, but there are elements that I think would surprise a lot of Americans that see the writing on the wall, that recognize that they need to end this war. And there are people in the current government in Ukraine that are realistic, and behind the scenes, they're trying to drive an end to this conflict that preserves a decent future for a Ukrainian nation. However, I think it's fair to say that Zelensky and a lot of his closest aides, it is in their interest for this war to continue. I think we both know that if there are elections held in the next few months, that Zelensky probably loses. He either loses to somebody like Zaluzhny, or he loses to somebody on the super far right, you know, somebody associated with like an Azov battalion or a right sector type movement. So it is in his interest for this war to continue for a period of time. And you can't ignore that. And that's why the United States, just like we were in March, needs to be prepared to use its leverage over Ukraine to get them to agree to things.
We've got to use leverage
ugly,
in every way possible. And that's what President Trump is doing. Dan, where can people go to follow you to get access to what you're putting out?
The best place is on my X account at Dan D. Caldwell. That's where I put out most of my work these days.
Folks, give him a follow. Serious stuff only over there. That's where the work really takes place. Dan Caldwell. Thanks so much, Rand, for being on. All right, we'll be right back. Real America's Voice, Human Events Daily.